Good evening, everybody. It is 6:04 p.m. on September 23rd, 2021. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Act of 2021, this meeting of the Somerville Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. An audio recording of these proceedings will be available upon request to planning@somervillema.gov. This meeting is being recorded. I am Mike Capuano. I am the chairman of the planning board. With me tonight are Amelia Aboff, Jahan Habib, Erin Gino, Rob Buchanan. We have a number of items on the agenda this evening, some of which are more administrative in nature. We're going to deal with the review and approval of 2 sets of meeting minutes. We are going to have a presentation by Louisa Oliveira. We have a request from 73 Summer Street to continue to October 7th. So the chair moves to continue discussion of 73 Summer Street to the meeting on October 7th, seconded by Amelia. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Erin votes aye.
Okay, that agenda item is continued. We will also open and take testimony on 2 new applications, one for 111 South Street and one for 121 South Street. And I would ask for the clerk of the planning board to please read into the record the notice of public hearing for those 2 items.
Yes, 111 South Street, Civic Space 1, P&Z 21-038. Boynton Yards Land Company, LLC, proposes to develop a neighborhood park in the high-rise district, which requires site plan approval. 121 South Street, Building 2, P&Z 21-077. Boynton Yards Land Company, LLC, proposes to develop a 11-story LEED Platinum lab building in the high-rise zoning district, which requires site plan approval.
Great. Thank you very much, Rob. I am going to take up the meeting minutes first because those should be reasonably quick. First, I'm going to open up is August 19th, 2021. Has everyone had a chance to review the meeting minutes, and does anybody have any proposed changes to those minutes before we vote on adoption? Seeing none, the chair moves to adopt the meeting minutes of August 19th, 2021, seconded by Amelia. Roll call vote. Chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Erin votes aye.
Wonderful. We have a unanimous vote approving those meeting minutes. The next are the minutes of September 2, 2021. Does anybody have any proposed amendments or edits to those meeting minutes? No. Okay, seeing none, the chair moves to approve the meeting minutes of September 2nd, seconded by Amelia. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Erin votes aye.
Okay, we have meeting minutes. Excellent. I'm going to ask, what do we got next? Louisa. Lisa's going to make a presentation to the board on open space matters, and I think you have a presentation for us that you can share.
Rebecca,
Yes,
can
Louisa.
you hear me? Yeah. Do you, any chance that you have? Are you also the zoning board person?
I am not.
Okay. I can't find my presentation, so I'm going to have to wing it. So the reason that I'm coming to you today, and thank you all for giving us time on the committee, is to introduce you to the Public Space and Urban Forestry Division. We are a division of 6 people, including me, that was started in 2019. And I wanted to let you know about what our division does, what we focus on, and the kinds of things we'd like to ask you to consider when you are making planning board decisions. So first, our mission is really to take care of the public realm, and by that it means parks, open spaces, plazas, and also the city's urban forest. So we just released an urban forestry management plan, which is 2 years of work that talks about the importance of our tree canopy. And we are also in the process of drafting guidelines for some things that you often look at, which are privately owned public spaces. And privately owned public spaces is often called POPs. And I just wanted to review with you some of the things that we are encouraging developers to do as they're designing their POPs. So one thing is, there are a number of studies about POPs. They've been in existence in New York City for quite some time. And we know that what happens over time is that these public spaces become or read as private spaces because there's no signage, because of the way they are actually designed that's not inviting, or because there is a sense that you have to go in and buy an $11 latte to sit there. Sometimes they get sold over time and then the ownership changes and they'll put up signs that say you can't come in here, things of that nature. And so we've been working very hard, and the new zoning gives us a lot of ability to do this, to make sure that the privately owned public spaces that we're generating through development serve the public as a whole. And some of the things that are required in the zoning is that they have different types of seating for different and differently abled bodies. All of our public spaces are ADA, but that they also have a certain number of trees. So in the zoning code, you'll see that there are requirements for each of the different types. We also, though, are looking for, when we are meeting with developers and reviewing their plans, that they have entrances that have a lot of porosity from the street so that it doesn't feel like a space that belongs to a building and serves the adjacencies of the building, but actually belongs to the entire public. And this includes having signs. We're working on signs that will deem these spaces public space so everyone knows, but also, more importantly, the entrances to these areas and how when you go in, you feel like, oh, this is a public park, I can be here. It's not a campus to this lab or a cafe space. So we've been working with the developers, and they usually have a number of meetings with, we call ourselves PISA, Public Space and Urban Forestry, before they come to the planning board. But we wanted you to be aware of the different things that we are working on. We have 2 staff people that primarily are reviewing development. Unfortunately, we just lost a staff member and we're in the process of hiring another. But those 2 staff folks and myself are landscape architects. So we are really kind of assuring that we don't get just a bit of lawn in a courtyard that doesn't feel like public space, and that we're starting to generate parks that are feel like actual parks. Another thing to note as some of these development projects come through is that some of them will have development along the sidewalk or in the public realm, and that we are trying to ask them that when they're placing things on the sidewalk, that there's some visual consistency with our city standard benches, lights, etc. So also something important to look at, because we don't want one block with 2 private developments that has one set of furniture and then you walk and there's a whole other. And trust me, nobody likes our public furniture. They all want to pick something very custom and lovely, but it is something that is maintainable and pretty much indestructible. So I just wanted to come and really introduce the team and also try to tell you about the efforts that we've been making in terms of development parcels, in addition to, you know, the parks and regular plaza work that we do. If you have any questions, I think it's okay for me to answer them.
I do, actually, Louisa. So we've got an application coming to us just after you formally log off on this. Is that one of the privately owned public spaces that your team has been speaking with and working with?
Yeah, are you looking at the Boynton Yards public space? Is that
Yes.
what you're? Yes, so there's a central park in the middle. Yeah, we've been working with them for quite some time and really pushing them to incorporate some features that, we always say, why would anyone who doesn't work in this building come to this park, to incorporate things that have some interest? So there's a water feature and some other things that would draw someone to the area. But yeah, we have been reviewing their plans pretty consistently.
Great. And at some point after we take testimony, I'm sure there will be, if there is not already a report or a recommendation from your board on this particular application. So I look forward to reading that and considering that when we take up the application. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, Amelia.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as we think about how we're assessing different proposals that come before us in relation to the development standards that have been set or are being developed by your team, will we see those sort of adherence to those reflected in the staff memos, or is there, we will do our best to be diligent and keep our eyes out in relation to how things are conforming, but what are the mechanisms that exist for communicating the results of your review to us? Is that going to be in the staff memo or something like the UDC memos, or is something blessed by your team before it makes its way in front of this board?
Right, so we are writing staff memos for both UDC and Planning Board, and usually those are, just as you say, a check against the zoning requirements, but they're also, we note if we're pushing, if there are things that are not in the requirements, if we're pushing them to, for example, make a more public entrance on this side, or that's all noted in the staff memo. And right now, because we're down one person, Courtney Kirk has been writing those, and she's very thorough. We will continue to make sure that that's the case.
Mr. Chair, if
Thank
I
you.
may, Rebecca speaking.
Yeah,
I
cool.
just wanted to add to Director Oliveira's note that planning and zoning staff and PSEF staff work very much in conjunction when there's a civic space staff report to do. So one difference you may see is that the memos will come from both divisions, the staff of both divisions, and we work collaboratively. So we do intend that our colleagues in PSEF, who are obviously much more hands-on with the standards and requirements for these departments, can give you their best analysis in those staff memos.
I appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing more of your group's work, Louisa. Anybody have any more questions for Louisa right now, or can I let her go to her next engagement? Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So next up on our agenda are the two parcels on South Street. I believe, Amelia, do you need to kick off?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will recuse myself from both of these cases. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm going to wait for Amelia to log off, and then we will invite the applicant to make a presentation. So, great.
All right,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking again. I will work on unmuting the team.
Okay.
And
Now, does the team, because they are two separate applications, but they're obviously somewhat linked. I don't know if the team wants to present them as two separate applications, the open space and the building, or in conjunction. I think it makes sense. Well, actually, let's see what the team wants to do, because I'm going to have to take testimony on each individual application. So even if the team does want to make a joint presentation, any testimony that I take is going to have to be kind of one and one. But I defer to how the development team wants to present the application.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I also would note that from a planning procedural perspective, these are treated as separate cases. So planning and zoning staff would very much appreciate it if we can at least try to get some distinction between the two paths, but you are absolutely correct that the two of them will be discussed together.
Yeah. Okay, then in that case, let's take the civic space application first. So if the applicant wants to make a presentation on 111, and just identify yourself for the record and the members of your team who will join you in the presentation for the record, please.
Excellent. Mr. Chair, I'm making Ian Ramey of the 111 team a presenter, and I will allow Mr. Fenton, who is unmuted, to introduce his team.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, Mr. Chair and the rest of the planning board, we would like to thank you very much for the time and the opportunity to present this new phase of our master plan. And we pledge to work collaboratively with the city. And in doing so, we've engaged some of the most forward-thinking consultants in the mobility management and economic development world to try to solve Boynton Yards and make it a model for others to emulate. We aspire to deliver on Summer Vision's objectives by creating a world-class micro-community at Boynton Yards. And we've begun to deliver on that vision. 101 South Street is nearly complete, and it's fully leased to 4 separate companies, portfolio companies with Flagship Pioneering, and soon to hire over 800 people in this building. And now with your support, we're poised to commence on building 2, a 350,000 square foot building with a contiguous half-acre parcel of civic space. Our vision is to create a science, living, and cultural center in one unique place, not just biotech campus. The upper floors of the development will be purpose-built environments for research, science, and eventually residential life. The ground levels we've built to create connected human experience with an integrated network of indoor and outdoor spaces, parks and terraces to celebrate what makes Somerville unique. We're focused on creating a civic destination with music, food, art, accessible to everyone, with vibrant shared seats, streets, and various public amenities and activations. We invested in Somerville because of its distinctive, independent culture and visionary urban development plan. And the approved plan will eventually produce 2,000 new jobs, over an acre of civic space, over 12,000 square feet of POPs, $10 million in annual taxes, $23 million in community benefits, and $55 million in infrastructure. This is truly a public-private partnership, and I think we're hoping to continue with this vision through the second application, the site plan review and approval of the civic space before us and the new building. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Rolla Indris, the project manager, and have her introduce our consultants.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for being here tonight. It was not long ago that we were in front of you talking about our master plan special permit, and we've gone a long way since then, collaborating with the community and the city to get here tonight. We're super excited to present both projects. I think we've received great feedback along the way and incorporated many of the neighborhood's comments as well. And just to the earlier point on whether it's one presentation or two, we actually have 2 separate presentations. So we'll see civic space first, and then we'll go to building 2. With that, I'll have Ian Ramey from Copley Wolf present civic space. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rolla. Hi, everybody. I'm having a little bit of screen difficulty getting the full screen to show, but I think you guys can see the presentation, correct?
Ian, the bottom of the screen is cut.
We can. So my question would be: is this presentation also going to be available on the city's website as a link to this application, Rebecca?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. I can work with the team to make this presentation available.
Thank you. Yeah, to the extent that that folks who are in attendance can't see applicant's presentation terribly well, it will be posted on the city's website under this application, so they can take a look at it at their convenience.
Understood.
Okay, give me a second here. When I go to full screen, for some reason, it goes to my other computer screen and I can't share that. I don't know why. So let me hang on a second here.
Ian, this is Rebecca speaking. You could try changing. You have a Mac or a PC.
It's a PC.
If you right-click on your desktop, you can access the display settings and set your display as basically to mirror everything so that all of your screens will show the same thing, and then you'll be able to show the presentation at full screen. All your
Okay.
monitors. My apologies, Mr. Chair. Ian, you're looking for display settings.
Yep.
And then if you scroll down to multiple displays, you should have, my apologies, I'm not using my dual monitors today, so I don't know exactly what it says, but the feature will allow you to select only mirroring.
Ian, do you want me to share your presentation?
That would be fantastic, Victor. Thank you so much.
Okay. So Rebecca, if you make me a presenter.
Certainly. Can you raise your hand so that I can find you? There you are. Thank you.
There we go.
You can see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so I'll mute myself while Ian is speaking, and then we'll segue into the Building 2 presentation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Victor, and apologize, folks, for the lag with that. Again, my name is Ian Ramey. I'm a principal and landscape architect with Copley Wolf Design Group, and we're very excited to be sharing with you tonight Civic Space 1, which is the first of 3 civic spaces that are part of the Boynton Yards development. Just a quick introduction. Again, Ian Ramey. We'll go through the master plan process, talk about existing conditions, demonstrate zoning compliance, and then get into some of the fun stuff, which is the vision and planning that went into the open space. Next, please. So where we are in the process, over the course of 2020 and early parts of 2021, we went through our master plan filing process. From that, we got into our individual building and permitting process, starting in the spring of 2021. Tonight, obviously, we'll be talking about Building 2 in the civic space. Early in the spring, we had our first neighborhood meeting. We had a great UDC session in April. We had a good neighborhood meeting number 2 in May. And then in June, we filed the special permit application. And of course, here we are tonight speaking with you. I also just want to note that sort of as Louisa touched on, we've had a lot of back and forth and great dialogue with Louisa and Courtney at PSUF. And those bullets that you see on the right are some of the frequent check-ins that we've had over the course of almost 18 months, actually. So there's been a lot of collaboration, which has been very helpful to us. To talk a little bit about the site, I think you guys are familiar generally where it is. This is an existing condition pre-development of the project. So Civic Space 1 is the central portion of the site that you see displayed here. The existing condition was primarily a low-rise building, which is called out as existing building. A lot of asphalt parking lots, a smattering of private trees, and the most interesting thing I think was the Aero Paper Fireman's Memorial, which was on site. Prior to the construction of the 101 South building, that memorial was disassembled, cleaned, and stored safely off-site by the applicant, and it will be reconstructed and relocated in the new civic space, and we can show you the thoughts for that. And then just some aerial photos of sort of the existing condition. So the building you see in the top two images is the 101 South building, which is nearing completion. The civic space itself is indicated by that red tone next to it. So it's got an immediate adjacency to that building. And then the images at the bottom are ground floor, ground level shots that show the extent of asphalt and again, that low rise building that was on site. So before we get into like the design and what it is, we always start to think about scale comparisons and how does this stack up against other well-known civic spaces in the greater Boston area. So the upper left image is our Civic Space 1. It's 22,360 square feet, which is about a half acre. That is what is bounded by that dashed red line in that upper graphic. And then we compared that same footprint to some other well-known open spaces and found that the closest comparison was the 401 Park on the Fenway in Boston, and also the Warp District Park on the Greenway downtown. And in the bottom images, you can see that same square footage of Civic Space 1 overlaid on really well-known places, just to give you a sense of the scale. So Copley Square, Post Office Square, and the lawn on D, and how those stack up. So then, we start to really begin our process with PSUF. As part of the master plan special permit, we had to do a civic space study, which you're probably familiar with, but basically it takes an inventory of existing open spaces within a half mile of the site and really tries to understand through that inventory of existing programming and activity, what are the needs that potentially are underserved in the community. And so the list that's on the right are all the things that kind of shook out of our analysis, and the items that are in bold are the ones that appear to us as being the most in need. And what we found was that it was largely active uses and flexible uses. So things like dog park and fitness and informal play, seeing a need for having more plaza and flexible spaces for seasonal uses and different community events. The idea of having performance space, a flexible lawn, not a lot of water play in the neighborhood, and maybe some idea of water features. We also, in talking with PSUF, understood that it's an area that really lacks a lot of vegetation, and whatever we could do to green it up and add more shade for the comfort of the park users was a really good thing to get into the planning of the space. And then lastly, I think as Louisa touched on, the idea of creating an 18-hour activated space that really is intended to serve as a community space as opposed to something that serves the adjacent tenants. The diagram that you see on the left is our beginning to sort of show how those elements would lay together. So we talked with Louisa and Courtney about creating gateway moments on the north and south sides of the open space. These would be the spot where people would feel welcome and want to enter into the park. And within those spaces, we would have public activators, things that would attract them. On the sides, we wanted to have a lot of porosity and attachment to the first floor uses of the building. And in the middle, to have a flexible space that could support a wide range of activities. The next slide, please. And then this is just a bunch of thumbnails about the process that we went through. So starting back in April or so of 2020 and working down towards the lower right, you can see the evolution of the park concepts, largely in part to feedback from PSUF. So you can see how the amount of green increased as we went through the process, how with each iteration we started to add more elements of activation, like where the water feature could be shown in blue, where some of the seating elements might be located, and how those things would sort of be laid out across the space to really make it something that would be successful as a community park. Next slide. And then, of course, with the zoning compliance, we're not required to do a green score like we are on the building, but we do have to comply with Chapter 13 of the zoning. And so as we went through that analysis in the civic space study, we identified that this type of space is a neighborhood park. It fits the criteria of that in the description of the various types of open space in the zoning. So we comply with things like the amount of landscape area where at least 50% of the site has to be vegetated. We comply with things like pervious area where at least 85% of the site has to be porous or pervious surface. And most importantly, we comply with the vegetation component, which requires that a neighborhood park have a large tree, one large tree per every 1,225 square feet, which equates to, in our case, 18 trees. Our proposal has 28 trees, so we've exceeded that, and we're excited to be able to have a lot more shade and biodiversity in this park for the community. Next slide. So then we get into the actual plan, and this is the form that it took as we went through our process. So you can start to see that on the northern side of the plan, adjacent to Thoroughfare 1, which is going to be a flush shared street that's really going to feel more pedestrian than vehicular. Adjacent to that thoroughfare is what we have called out as the flexible plaza. That is a hardscape area that will sort of spill into the thoroughfare, and you can imagine that if that street were to be shut down for festivals, that sort of activity that would happen in that event in the street would then spill into the open space. Adjacent to that, at the top of the site, is where we have a civic scaled shade structure. This would be a large arbor element that would provide shade, and below it would have things that are public activators. So what we're thinking about having there are things like public fire pits, movable seating, and also a combination of fixed seating. So there's a wide range of optionality for users and spaces that people can kind of socialize in at the top of the space. On the bottom, adjacent to South Street, is where we have interactive water feature, which would be a flush water feature element that has color changing lights that do different effects. So that's really a dynamic and fun kind of element that attracts families. Surrounding that would be a series of fixed bench seating and plantings. So it's a green space, a vegetated space. And within that vegetated area is where we are thinking we would like to locate the Fireman's Memorial. We still need to kind of work with PSUP and with the dedicators of that memorial to dial in the detail of where that goes. But that's approximately where it was on the existing site, and we feel like that's a good spot for it. And then two other things to point out, adjacent to the water feature is what we call the civic platform. That is a slight grade change element, like a bleacher element, where people can sit at different levels and interact with the open space. And that civic platform serves as the bottom of what we call the slope green, which is something we'll talk about in the Building 2 application. But the idea is that there's this landscape gesture that ties the first floor or the civic space with the second floor of the new building and really makes a unified and integrated composition. In the middle of the open space is the flexible lawn, and over that we have a series of suspended string lights so that we have a nice sort of ceiling above it, but maximum space without having a lot of light poles and things like that. Next, please. In terms of the topography of the site, it's completely barrier-free and ADA accessible. It's a very flat site. The elevation is primarily all at elevation 10. The only grade change that we have really is the one that we're creating with the civic platform. So on the lower left-hand side of the civic space, you can see that we're getting up about 2.5 feet to elevation 12.5. There's an accessible ramp that provides ADA access. And then that grade change is sort of stepped down into a series of bleacher elements that allow people to sit at different levels and interact with the open space. Next slide. And then the next series really gets into sort of the edge conditions around the open space. So this section cut is taken on the eastern face of Building 2. And so we have a widened hardscape that interacts with the first floor use of the building. You can see our property line and then a little more hardscape. And then there's a gentle roll to the topography with vegetation. And that's sort of the transition into that kind of more pastoral green space. Next slide. This is a section cut through Thoroughfare 1, which is again on the northern side of the civic space. Again, Thoroughfare 1 is a flush curb condition that can be shut down as a festival street and really have more of a pedestrianized feel than a roadway feel. And the idea there is that that active use of food trucks and other sort of, different town events or city events that may happen can occupy that street and then really kind of spill into that park space. And then you get an indication here also of the shade structure, the idea of the public fire pits, and then the movable seating around it. Next slide. So this is the opposite side section against the 101 South building. It's a very similar condition to what we have on the west side with Building 2. The difference here is that that hardscape is a little bit narrower against the 101 South building, with the idea there that we're really trying to maximize the green to the left of that property line to make that park as big as it can be. Next slide. And then as we move further south along the 101 South building, there's the lobby, which is basically an arcade. The face of the building at the first level is pulled back, so that hardscape is recessed. And that is where we have some of our adjacent hardscape that serves not only the 101 South building, but sort of starts to bleed into what would be the southern entry, the gateway into the civic space. And you can see how with a little bit of topography and the indication of trees that we're really trying to not only just provide shade, but also sort of buffer the building so that the park feels of a comfortable scale. Next, please. And then lastly, this is the section through South Street. So we have the road condition of South Street. We have a protected bike lane, which is right between the car and the curb. We have compliant street trees, which line the sidewalks. And then we have our entry hardscape, and then you get an indication of what the water feature would be as an attractor as people are coming off the sidewalk and into the space. It's something that we feel is a really good amenity for the neighborhood. Next, please. And then I talked a little bit about the civic platform and how that interacted with what we call the sloped green. So this is a zoomed out section showing how the grade change works. So on the right-hand side, you're down at the elevation 10, which is the general elevation of the park. There's the terrace seating that gets you up about 2.5 feet where people are sitting at different levels. That platform also has the ability to serve as a small performance stage because it's elevated. It's a space where you can imagine small events taking place. And then to the backside of that, we start to introduce more steps and more vegetation, which then climbs up over the bike room of building 2. It's a intensive green roof, and that landscape rolls right up into the second floor elevation of the terrace. So it's a publicly accessible open space that really ties the building and the landscape together. Next slide. And here's a zoomed out bird's eye view that shows from the south what the space will feel like. You can see the elements of the terrace seating, the civic platform. You can see the water feature in the center lower portion of the view, the large flexible lawn, and then on the far north side, you can see the civic scale shade structure. Next slide, please. And then here's that same view, but down at the ground level as if you're in the space. So you can get a sense of the varied types of seating, the fixed benches, the movable seating, the colorful furniture, the fountain that's beyond, the idea of these suspended lights that kind of carry the theme of the open space from north to south. And then to the left, you can see the civic platform with the grade change and the stepped planters and the slope green beyond. In terms of the materials, this gives some character sketches of what the water feature could look like in terms of the color changing and the types of water displays, the image of the suspended lights above the open space, and then the hardscapes on the right-hand side, a combination of permeable pavers and concrete for accessibility, and then in the upper right, the idea of this community fire pit. Next slide. And then the site furnishings, again, really want to have a combination of fixed and movable seating of different sizes, characters, colors. So it's a really vibrant and sort of dynamic public space where people can kind of move the seating around as they see fit to kind of dial in their own preference. And then the idea of the shade structure. So these are some precedent images of projects that we've worked on before. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the plan view and then a 3D model that we've developed to study how the lath work on the top or the roof of it can be designed so that it casts very interesting patterns throughout the day on the hardscape and provides different degrees of shade depending on the angle of the sun. Next slide. And these are some vignettes about the slope green and the civic platform and how those are sort of envisioned as a unified concept. So I guess the sketch on the upper right shows a really quick thumbnail view of how we're thinking that grade change works and how the vegetation steps down the slope from the second floor, and then some concepts of the tree planting and the grove of vegetation and how that might be composed. Next slide. Bike parking. So going through the process, we're really trying to maximize the amount of open space in the park, and both of the adjacent buildings, which are very integrated in terms of the access, have a lot of requirements for bike parking. So the current proposal is that all of that short-term or bike rack parking that's out at the sidewalk is actually on the adjacent parcels, but there's a lot of it. The other thing to note is that on the Building 2 parcel, we have a large bike room that Victor will talk about that's located below the slope green. So there's a lot of activation and a lot of facility there for bikes immediately adjacent to the civic space. And then, of course, the fun stuff. So the vegetation, the existing condition didn't have a lot of that. It was not biodiverse. There wasn't a lot of it. And so we've been working with the native plant ordinance that the city has put out. We've been talking with PSUF about different species, and we've been talking to other consultants internally about how to get species that are of maximum wildlife value so that it's a healthy ecosystem. And so the idea here is that we have all native plants, plants that are able to support a lot of habitat, a lot of pollinators, but also be colorful and beautiful compositions unto themselves, so that it's a very pleasing thing to be in terms of that open space. Next slide. And then this is just a quick diagram that talks about on the top line, that's the existing biodiversity that's out there. There's 4 different types of trees, and there's only a handful of them. And then the bottom image is a graphic that depicts the amount of new trees and the amount of biodiversity that we're proposing for the civic space. So you can see in the comparison how much more diverse it gets in the end condition. We're very excited about that. Next slide. And then just to underscore the benefits of the landscape design, obviously we're trying to have native plants, but we're going beyond that and really trying to have species that are supportive of the local bees and the insects, and really support habitat and pollinators, so that we can start to bring back some of those ecological services to the neighborhood. Next slide. And then the last thing to touch on is this idea of the temporary park. So all this stuff is great and will be built in the future, but we really want to get into the ground now. And so as part of the 101 South project, the interim park has been constructed, and it's basically a lawn space that has some seating, and it's something that we're sort of using as a testing ground, if you will, so that we can survey users and try to get more information about what people would like to see be within this final design of the park space in terms of programming and activation and other features. So I think if you go to the next slide, obviously, the developers are doing a lot of activation of late, through the whole course of summer, pretty much. The Once Somerville Music Festival has been having venues out on the site or adjacent to the site, which has been really successful and really starting to get people excited about coming to the site. And there's a ton more of upcoming events. I mentioned the idea of a survey, and so for a lot of our public park projects, we employ a SurveyMonkey app, where it's an app-based questionnaire, basically, where you can sort of survey what people using the space would like to see. And then you're allowed to sort of get all of that data and sort through it and really come to a good idea of what a consensus-based approach might be to some of the uses for the open space. Next slide. And so here's just a couple shots of what the current condition is. So you can see that on the western side of the civic space, the 101 South building has actually begun to install or has installed a lot of the permanent vegetation that will be part of the finished park design. So that'll already be in place and really start to get a mature condition by the time the rest of the park is built out. The lawn is in place. It's still being established and watered in, but that'll be able to support various types of activities very soon. Next. And then this is just some possible ideas of other types of activation that could happen in the interim park, but then also if they're successful and people really like them, then those activations can happen in the final design as well. And that's really the intent here, is that we're trying to have a flexible space that can support as much wide range of activity as possible. And I believe that's our last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. So I have a couple of questions, mostly for staff, because I thought the presentation was excellent. I think the visualizations that you presented were very, very nice, and it's clear that it was done in conjunction with Louisa's team to maximize the city's needs as it's relayed by them. So the two questions that I have for staff. One, it's my understanding from the staff memorandum that this private space is going to eventually be transferred to the city for city ownership and maintenance. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, this is Andrew Graminsky, planner with Planning and Zoning Division. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Excuse me. I also know that there is an ongoing discussion between the applicant and staff on drafting an easement for accessibility to that park in building 2. That's still ongoing, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay, so it is not my intention to hold a vote on this application until we can ensure that accessibility to the park is something that's satisfactory to the city, particularly if it will be transferred to city ownership, such that it can be taken, whole bore by the city when it's done. But short of that, I think this was an excellent presentation, and I thought it was really, really well thought out. So I want to thank the applicant for that. Are there any other questions or comments by members of the board right now before I open this application up for public testimony? Yes, Aaron.
I had a quick one. Yeah. And maybe you've covered it, but I missed it. But I was just thinking about the signage for said park. I mean, presumably it will get named at some point, and I was just wondering how you guys are conceiving of like what that would look like.
Yeah, so I can answer that, and maybe Rolla can jump in, but we've definitely had some initial studies of where the signage will go and what it will look like. We have talked with PSUF about that, and we're in receipt of their standards for, how the park signs need to be laid out. I don't think we're fully there yet with the design, but we're definitely in dialogue with them on that.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking. Can I offer one slight clarification, which is I believe that Andrew had mentioned that we would both own and be maintaining the park, but I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that this park space will be delivered to the city, but the applicant is going to be responsible for maintenance.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for that clarification. We get all the benefits and none of the responsibility. It's always the way I like to do it, like dogs and children. So, okay. Does anybody else have anything further they'd like to add for this application before I open it up for public testimony? Okay. Seeing none, I would like to open up public testimony for the application at 111 South Street. If you would like to provide testimony, please raise your hand and I will call on you in the order in which I see your raised hand. Going once, going twice. Okay, seeing none, I will close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to anyone that wants to speak in opposition or otherwise express concern about this application. Please raise your hand. Going once. Going twice. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing. Yes, Erin.
Mr. Chair, through you, could I actually ask a few more questions of the applicant?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to cut off anyone from the public.
Yep.
Great. So I'm actually really excited about this. I think it looks pretty great. And I was looking at the plantings that you guys have got, and I was wondering if you had considered anything about the rabbit resistance of said flowers. I don't know if you've gardened around here recently, but black-eyed Susans are, not long for this world. So a lot of our favorite perennials are, also their favorites. So just wondering if you've kind of thought about that, or even have talked to the folks across the street at South Street Farm. I think they have a perennial bed too, and they would have probably a similar rabbit population problem then as the site here.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. To answer your question, we haven't really thought too much about the rabbits. We're really trying to attract more of the native species as much as we could, but I understand where you're going with that. So I think we're certainly aware of lists of what rabbits like and don't like, and I think we can kind of tailor the plant palette to not leave ourselves completely susceptible to a complete wipeout by the rabbits.
Yeah, it's really, yeah. I mean, you want the plants that they want, but the challenge is how do you manage having those plants, or really having any plants that kind of survive the spring.
Right. I think one of the strategies I know of is that if you have a species that the rabbits are attracted to, then you can surround it by other species that they are, sort of repelled by, if you will. And that might be a way to kind of mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. Just to put a sort of a bug in your ear about, the perennial beds that, look really nice, and sort of ideas for how to mitigate that. Second, just, sort of a comment about the fountain area. I really like it, and it reminds me a lot of the fountain with the seating sort of next to it, the fountain outside of the Park Street station downtown on the Common, in that water feature with sort of seating next to it. I can imagine, people sitting down with sort of a newspaper or what have you. And I was wondering if you had considered maybe little free libraries in that area to draw people, off the street and say, hey, grab a book, take a seat, use the space.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was as part of our civic space study, the Little Free Library was one of the elements that came up as a possible activator. So I think we could definitely look at locating some of those in those sort of strategic areas where we think people are going to congregate.
Yep. Yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see, the reaction of people to occupying the space once it's there. I know it's hard to kind of predict the future, right? So.
Yep.
And that's what I've got. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Yep. No, thank you. Your questions about the rabbitability of plants, like, yeah, thinking about my own backyard. I was like, yeah, you're right. It's a great point.
Yeah, I had to install 100 feet of chicken wire this year.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason I don't have any tomatoes this year. Does anybody else have any comments or questions for the applicant or of staff for this application? John?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Through you, I have a question for the staff. So just understanding the future maintenance of the park, I just want to get a better understanding of what sort of verification or enforcement mechanisms there may exist within the city of Somerville to ensure that the maintenance of the park is held to a specific standard or a specific guideline. If you could speak about that, that would be really helpful.
Yes, of course. This is Andrew Graminsky again with Planning and Zoning staff. We have proposed a maintenance agreement in the staff memo regarding the maintenance of this park. And if you want, I could state that language if it's helpful.
Oh, I understand. I'm just looking for more of what occurs in practice rather than what's been proposed. I read the staff memo and I understand the details. I'm just trying to understand what the verification means and mechanisms might be, as well as any need for validation on a certain time period or certain duration that may be necessary.
Sure. I'll probably have to consult with other staff members, but however, Rebecca, if you want to provide any sort of feedback on that comment, but if not, we will definitely do some research and get back.
Certainly, Andrew. Mr. Chair, this is Rebecca speaking for you to Mr. Habib. Typically what happens is maintenance will be conditioned through the maintenance agreement, and then we will deliver that information as part of the final decision. It'll get recorded, and ISD will be generally the division that will keep track of maintenance issues. So it's not typically something that planning and zoning does, but we can consult with ISD to see what their procedures are. I think a lot of it does sometimes depend on members of the public noticing and reporting maintenance problems so that we can address them, so that we can see that they're addressed. And I do know that my PSEF colleagues have been on some other parks. They have been very clear about making sure that the eventual signage will also have contact information for how to identify maintenance issues and get them addressed. That's one thing that I know that PSEF has been very intent about, because again, there's no sense in having these great parks if they're not going to be maintained really well. So there are multiple ways that we're trying to go forward with this, but in fairness, these are coming forward. These are new parks coming forward under the new ordinance. So we're kind of figuring it out a little bit too.
I think that's fair, and I should also clarify that this does not cast any aspersions towards the applicant. I'm very much impressed by the plans. I'm just looking for what you just highlighted, Rebecca, in terms of all these new parks and civic spaces coming online. It's wonderful, and we just want to make sure that they continue to remain wonderful. And thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Rob, did I see your hand? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be brief. I too, I think this is a really strong proposal, strong application. We're seeing things in this application that we would have loved to have seen in other applications that we've seen come through Somerville over the years. So thank you very much for, I think, something that looks really exciting and thoughtful. It's hard for me to really find much here to quibble with. I think I had really two questions. One is, have you given much thought to kind of what this space looks and feels like during the winter months? In part, the reason why I asked that is, it appears to be kind of all, deciduous trees, and I can understand why, but I'm just thinking of, what type of, greenery or something that's going to make this feel like a place people want to be during the shoulder months. So that's question one. And the only other question I had was, in terms of placement of these catenary lights, I see how they're placed over the green, and I can understand that. But once you kind of transition into the hardscaped area, it almost appears as though it's hard to figure out where to anchor them. And so I can see the application includes kind of, some posts to affix the end of those light streams too. Have you given any consideration to, where those are placed? And I only ask because it almost feels like they're kind of in the way. That's really my only two sets of questions. Thank you.
Sure. So I can take those in reverse order. So on the light posts, yeah, we're definitely sensitive to that. I think we're still looking at it and trying to figure it out. Conceptually, what we thought we ideally could do is locate them at that transition point between the lawn or the green space and the hardscape, so it would be sort of nestled in a buffer. And we've done that for as much of it as we can, but of course we're trying to achieve certain hardscape and circulation patterns where it's difficult to do that. I think we still need to refine where they go exactly, and it's a good comment and one that we're definitely still trying to fine tune. The second comment about the winter condition or the off-season condition. One of the big reasons why we started talking about the fire and water concept is obviously that fire is something that you could see being a really great attractor from all year, but particularly when it starts to get chilly out at night and through the winter, it could be something that's very great for as an activator and as a draw for people. The idea of evergreens is one that we have spoken about, particularly with the wildlife consultants. And I think there may be opportunity there to have strategically some larger evergreens. We don't have them any proposed currently, but that may be something we can do. But I will say that the lower level landscape, the understory landscape, the thought there is that we have things like red twig dogwood and other ornamental grasses and things that hold their foliage throughout the year and really have a winter interest unto themselves and are really quite beautiful in the seasons beyond the summer. And so we do want to sort of maximize seasonal interest throughout the year as much as we can.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else want to ask any questions on this application? Seeing none, I want to thank the applicant, and we will take up this application possibly at our next meeting. But like I said, we are going to wait until any easement issues are worked out with the city at the minimum. So thank you very much. I'm going to ask for a presentation on the next application, which is 121 South Street, which is the building component of this set of plans.
Okay. Rolla, did you want to say anything to start, or should I just jump in?
All yours, Victor.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet all of you. I'm Victor Agron. I'm an associate principal with ARC. And I really appreciate your hosting us tonight and listening to the presentation. I'd like to thank the members of the board, the community, the Urban Design Commission, and Somerville Planning and Zoning for their help and support with this project. So we're looking at building 2 now, and I wanted to take a moment and note that this project builds on the values established in the Boynton Yards Master Plan, and in particular the values established in Summer Vision, which in brief summary are engage the community, strengthen neighborhood commercial centers and integrate a diversity of activities, facilitate transit-oriented development with lively human-scaled character, improve our shared environmental quality, foster vital, healthy, inclusive, and distinctive urban neighborhoods that are the best places to live, work, play. So these were things that we read at the beginning of the design process and informed us as we went forward. So we'll look at the framework of the values that I just referenced, quickly go through the design process, and I'll speak quickly about some of these issues and get into the overall design of the building. Much like the planning process with the civic space, we had several neighborhood meetings, several reviews with the Urban Design Commission, and a number of meetings with planning and zoning who've supported us throughout this process. The neighborhood meetings were very positive for building community support and hearing their feedback on what they wanted on the site and what the building would mean to them. The Urban Design Commission had a number of recommendations for the building and the public space around the building and the kind of materiality and character of the building, which we took into consideration. And overall, the process has been very collaborative, and that collaboration has been really beneficial for the project, and we're really grateful for everyone's help in this process. So the key ideas for the building are grounded in this idea of site and creating a sense of place, particularly when the public realm is a priority and the landscape and building are linked inextricably, and that it's not just a building plopped in the middle of the landscape, but the landscape really starts to play an active role in the development of the building, which is a particularly important value when you're building a new destination in what is now a kind of industrial area. So it's a real idea of creating a new neighborhood and kind of home for a new neighborhood that will be really meaningful for people. And you can see here the diagram of the Building 1, which is 101 South Street, the civic space in between, and Building 2, which we're talking about today. So as we began, that our process is predicated on finding the best possible solution. That involved a lot of sketching, thinking about ways in which to connect people from all four corners of the site, and how can we begin to draw people to the site. Ideas of greening the building, landscape, ideas of ecology and sustainability were primary in everything that we did. And fundamentally, as a means of establishing connections to the landscape and making the place feel very much like the public realm that people wanted to be in, and this is a home for people. In terms of the massing, we began looking at a variety of massing options, thinking about how we organize the building around the site, how do we draw people through the building, and how people begin to kind of perambulate around the building as priorities. As we move forward, we began to distill some of these massing studies into clear ideas that are linked in notions of art and science and placemaking. And that idea of placemaking is fundamental in everything that we were thinking about. As we move forward, the larger ideas began to distill into three clear ideas that we defined as link, which is about making connections, this idea of origami, thinking about folded paper, and this idea of kind of marrying science and art. The third option kind of became a hybrid of the two, thinking about this idea of an open book, ideas of text and reading, and kind of connections to public space and how people kind of spend their time in public space. As a part of the Somerville zoning ordinance, we were required to bring three different options and distinct options to the UDC for review. So we developed each one individually. The link, kind of traversing diagonally from northwest to southeast. Origami, thinking about this folded surface. And with the origami was where this first idea of the landscape beginning to kind of fold up into the building became an idea. And then with open book, the articulation of the building and thinking about that idea of landscape being integrated with the building became an even more powerful notion that we began to develop. And quickly, these are the kind of larger views, the initial concepts: link, the origami study, and the open book, which subsequent to reviewing with the Urban Design Commission, they agreed that our preferred scheme of the open book was the way to proceed. The open book also offered us a little bit more flexibility in terms of the massing development and thinking about the Somerville zoning guidelines for the requirement of a two-story podium and a clear division of a base, a middle, and a top. It also allowed us to begin to refine the massing and scale, to carve away the corners, and make a building that was more human scaled and also had different readings depending on where you looked at the building from different areas in the site. Very quickly, these are the setback diagrams that have been submitted to planning and zoning. Zoning compliance diagrams, which I don't need to spend time on, but articulating the two-story podium and the tripartite organization of the building and the conformance to the Somerville zoning guidelines. And this image further articulates conformance to Somerville zoning guidelines, both in terms of the development of the facade, in terms of piers or pilasters, the visual light transmittance of the glass, and the visual connections through it, and then also clearly differentiated lobby and storefront facade system to create this human scale development around the building. Conceptually, this idea of placemaking was very important to the development of the plan. And we're working at a range of scales and textures and really thinking about how do we begin to attract people to the building and through the site. And as Ian noted, that Thoroughfare 1 and the connection to the north side of our building has the potential to become a very expansive and generous public space. And to that end, the north side of our building at the main entry is envisioned as potentially something that can become an outdoor public market. And then this idea of a public market also potentially connecting from the west side of our building, the right, to the civic space also became a very powerful idea, in addition to the bicycle parking underneath the sloped green that Ian showed you previously. And here's a little bit more of the process, really thinking earnestly about how you begin to fold the landscape up and draw people up into the upper levels of the building. Again, really working to create a sense of place, not just at the ground level, but a sense of place at the level 2 of the building, so that the public can really begin to permeate the development. As the project developed, this is a cutaway isometric, and just to organize you, facing us is north against Thoroughfare 1, where the main lobby is, and you can see in yellow the articulation of the public lobby, a set of civic stairs that go to an arts and creative space, and then a connection near South Street to an upper level terrace that then connects to the sloped green roof above the bike room and then to the civic space. And one of the really helpful feedback that we got from the Urban Design Commission was to further this idea and add a public stair, which you can see to the right of the screen, that then takes us back from the level 2 terrace and down to Windsor Street, so people can really kind of circulate around and have multiple access points to the building. In plan, this is just a plan view. You can see the lobby to the north, the building entrance, what we're calling the winter market in green adjacent to the civic space, some retail space to the northwest, a bike room for 102 bikes, and then the sloped green roof rising up over the bike room that then connects the civic space to the upper level of the building, which you can begin to see here. So this sloped green is above the bike room. This yellow space is the civic stair that connects to the level 1 lobby. There's the arts and creative space there, which potentially could be an art gallery, some spill out space, and then people can begin to occupy this terrace and make their way back down to Windsor Street on the public stair. And then I'll turn it over to Ian for some quick discussion of the landscape.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, so as Victor touched on, really that north side of the building, there's a really expanded public realm there. We think that a lot of the foot traffic and the bicycle traffic will be coming from the left-hand side, from the Union Square side of things. And so the idea there is that there's a receiving entry plaza right at that upper left-hand corner. And then as the building is pulled back with an arcade, having a really dynamic hardscape there with an interesting paving pattern that creates subspaces, that plays with the architecture, but also draws your eye along the facade to the green space beyond, to the civic space, to make a really kind of welcoming public realm. And then adjacent to Thoroughfare 1, you can see there's a really robust palette of street trees and site furnishings for a very shaded and comfortable experience there. And then wrapping around to the south side, obviously the slope green is something that we've talked about, and the idea of that landscape starting at the lower level of the civic space and climbing up the slope above the bike space, and then reappearing again at the second floor roof terrace, and then continuing on and stepping down again on the left-hand side or the west side of the building, where it meets the intersection of the public realm at grade at the intersection of Windsor and South. So really a composition of landscape integrating and carrying through the building for our unified composition. And then I guess the last thing just to note on sort of mobility and complete streets, on Windsor and South Street, we have raised cycle tracks, something that we work with mobility on, and we have suspended pavement systems for the street trees. So we have a really strong growing medium to maximize the urban forest there. So for the building, we obviously have to do a green score, and a lot of our credit comes from the slope green, which is an intensive green roof, but also the vegetation that we have on the west side along Windsor. So for this district, we need to have a 0.2 rating. With this landscape design, we are at 0.33, so we exceed those requirements for green score. And then again, we saw this previously, but I think what this shows is not only on the slope green side and the integration with the civic space, but the reappearing landscape on the second floor level with trees and plantings. And then again, it picks up and then steps down, down to the street level on the left side. And this is an early sketch of what that will look and feel like, just a vignette basically of how with this monumental stair, publicly accessible, but having it be integrated with the landscape and feel like it's something that's unique and sort of signature. And then similarly, just sort of walking around the site, we saw this condition previously, but this is the edge at the civic space where we have that slight buffer between the hardscape of building 2 and the civic space. And then the section that is on the west side along Windsor, again, working with mobility, we have 2-way bike lanes. The bike lane that is closest to building 2 is actually a raised cycle track condition that has a buffer to it, the 6-foot wide furnishing zone and the 6-foot wide pedestrian zone. And then because of resiliency and flood issues, the finished floor is a little bit elevated. So there's some grade change there that we mitigate. And then the section through Thoroughfare 1, again, you can see the arcade on the right-hand side. You see that broad shared drive condition where there's pedestrians and bikes and cars, 8-foot wide furnishing zone, a wide pedestrian zone that's around 17 feet, and then an additional 17 feet, which is comprised of that arcade space where you can imagine those outdoor markets spilling out and really making that a wonderful public realm. And a lot of the hardscape and furnishing elements are similar to what's being used in the park. This is the palette of materials that we've worked with to date. So I think you get a sense of the materials and the color palettes that we're working with. Again, the aerial view sort of looking more focused on the civic platform and the slope green and how those relate to each other. On the lower left, you can see the lights of the bike room, which is an activator itself. And then sort of spinning around and looking at that same view of how the trees march down above that bicycle room. And then again, just on the species, trying to really play up the biodiversity and cater to the local wildlife, providing habitat for the migratory birds, nesting grounds for them and so forth. So a lot of those same concepts that we're talking about in the civic space, we want to carry into the landscape around the building. So again, it's a very integrated composition. And of course, I don't know, Victor, if you want to speak about the raptors, but we've had a lot of dialogue about encouraging, that might be one way to deter the rabbits actually, but the idea of bringing more than just the little songbirds, but bringing more diverse species into the site with different strategies on the architecture.
And in particular, there's an opportunity with bats because bats are a threatened species and bats are very beneficial to the environment, particularly because they consume mosquitoes and other bad bugs. And peregrine falcons are also endangered, and they do very well on buildings. So as part of our work with our habitat consultant, we're looking at finding a home for some peregrine falcons on the building, which will help control the rodent population around the building.
We're gonna have a building with peregrine falcons on the roof. That's just awesome. Cool to me.
It's exciting. We're pretty excited about it.
With the live webcam.
Yes.
Yeah.
You better.
And
as we were talking about it, I started looking at a lot of live webcams of peregrine falcons, and it's completely mesmerizing, particularly in the spring when the babies are hatching. It's just unbelievably fun. Sorry, Ian, go ahead.
That's fine. This is the same concept as what we showed you for the civic space. It's just tailored to what we actually have on the building 2 site. So the same approach holds where we're increasing the biodiversity and increasing the number of trees.
Thank you, Ian. So I'll pick up the pace a little bit. As part of the city's and our project's commitment to the environment, the building will be certifiable LEED Platinum, which is one of the highest levels of certification for green buildings. And this diagram describes some of the highlights of our very thorough and deep environmental strategy for the project, which includes native vegetation, the green roof / slope green that we've talked about, reuse of water and water storage, parking for electric vehicles, enhanced mechanical systems that will reduce natural gas usage by over 80%, triple glazing, and broad access to daylight and views with energy efficient lighting. I noted stormwater harvesting, and then the green roof. In addition, the project will purchase renewable energy credits and some carbon offsets. The podium, just very quickly showing you this slide again to reorient you. Facing us is the north, again, thoroughfare 1. 101 South Street is to the left. The civic space is in between. South Street is to the top of the page, and just reorienting you to Windsor to the right and so on as we kind of move around the building. And these are some diagrams that we submitted to the city articulating the 2-story podium base, the articulation of the building middle, and the articulation of the storefront and street front public realm in conformance with the Somerville zoning guidelines. And this is a rendering along thoroughfare 1 and Windsor Street, which also responds to some of the feedback we received from the Urban Design Commission. As we move around the building, we're looking at a diagram of thoroughfare 1, the civic space, and here again the building steps up to a 2-story volume. Again, another recommendation from the Urban Design Commission, which is what we call the winter market, or a kind of public market space where people can begin to kind of spill in and out of the building depending on the use, and it has a kind of more direct connection to the civic space. And here is a view of it in that corner at thoroughfare 1 from the northeast, looking into the 2-story volume of the winter market. And as we're spinning around underneath the arbor that Ian described before, looking into the winter market, and then here is a professional rendering of what this space might look like. So potentially a restaurant, or potentially it has multiple uses depending on how the program shakes out. And then pulling back outside the building within the civic space, you see the water feature, the raised platform, the slope green to the left, and the visual connection to the winter market in the building. And then you can see the raised level 2 public terrace on the building there. Moving around and up, we now find ourselves on the upper level terrace outside the arts and creative space, or perhaps there's a cafe or bar up there. You can sit on benches overlooking the sloped green and then look out onto South Street, and perhaps in the future an enhanced South Street Park. And then swinging around to South Street, you can see the bike room sliding underneath the sloped green roof. And then moving around the building, a view of the bike room at nighttime, the corner of Windsor and South Street with the public stair, and then moving back around the building at Windsor and thoroughfare 1, we get a broad view of the building, the articulation of the 2-story podium base, the clear delineation of the building middle, and then the top. And there have been many components which responded to feedback from the Urban Design Commission, in particular the articulation of the top of the middle and the building cornice, which was very helpful. And then lastly, an image at Windsor and South Street of the future building. So it's been a very healthy, fun, productive discussion and design process. It's been a great collaboration with the city and the Urban Design Commission, and of course Leggett McCall as the developer. And overall, it's really been a rewarding design process for us, and something that's very meaningful in terms of how we approach the building. And we think this is going to be a very great contribution to Somerville, and we're very excited and proud of the building that we've all designed together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask members of the board if they have any questions of the applicant or of staff at this point, or any comments. No. I will just say I thought there was just like the presentation of the civic space that you all did a few minutes ago. I thought this was fantastic. I think this is a good looking building. While I sometimes disagree with the recommendations of the Urban Design Commission, I value their encouragement for you to have the two-story podium with the columns and some space that humanizes the building. I just know that some of the buildings that I used to work in and around in the Seaport don't have that. It's just here's the building and it's overwhelming. And I think this really brings it into a more usable and scaled view when you're walking into the building or potentially in that civic space. I think it makes it a much more appealing feature to the building. So
Thank you. Yeah, that overwhelming monumentality that some buildings have, where they're completely disconnected from the ground and you feel like you don't have any access to the building, is exactly what we were trying to avoid. And it's this connection to people and place that were primary values for us.
I can't tell you how many buildings I tried to find the entrance to and couldn't.
Understood.
Yeah, sometimes I wish that was the case for my old office building, but so no, thank you all very much. Again, we're going to hold off on taking a vote until, because I believe the easement onto the civic space will come from this property. So I want to make sure that everything is worked out by way of connecting the two spaces legally and practically before the board takes a vote on it. But what I'd like to do is open it up for public testimony unless there is any other questions from the board or any comments from staff. I'd like to open it up to public testimony for anybody that wants to speak in support of the application for Boynton Yards Building 2, which is also called 121 South Street. So if anybody wants to speak in support of the application, raise your hand. Once, twice, seeing none, I will close this portion of the public hearing and open it up to anyone that wants to speak in opposition to the application or otherwise express concern. Raise your hand. Seeing none, I will close that portion of the public hearing. And for the record, I was reminded that I didn't set a date for written testimony to be submitted on the civic space. I'm going to leave the written record open for both applications, for the civic space and for the building, until Friday, October 1st at noon, which is the Friday before our next regularly scheduled meeting. Is it planning at somervillema.gov, Rebecca?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's exactly it.
Okay. So for anybody that wants to submit written testimony on either of those applications, they may do so by way of that email address by noon on October 1st. So does anybody else have any questions for the applicant at this time? Erin?
More of a comment, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
I would like to maybe found the Falcon fan club. I really like that part of the presentation. So
Thank you.
Kudos for working with one of those, like with the consultant and thinking about not only our pollinators, but also the predator side of the ecosystem.
Thank you.
We learn a little bit more about you each day, Erin. Yes, Rob?
Yeah, thank you. We certainly do. I have some black-eyed Susans myself, and they have survived the summer quite well. So I have been lucky. Thank you again for a really excellent presentation. And I know this has come quite a long way through, our I think it's a 12 or 13 step process. I had, I guess first, just a general comment, which is, which I want to say before I make my other comments. which is I was following along your presentation with some of the materials that are posted online. And I noticed there's just, you know, some a little bit more minor differences in some of the, like the plan set, the configuration of the lobby, et cetera, from what was submitted and posted on the city's website versus what was in the presentation. So I guess my first comment would just be to invite maybe updating the plan set submission so that that we know we're looking at the right thing as we're evaluating the application. I think that would be really helpful. And the reason why I say that is some of the things that I was seeing in tonight's presentation are better than what I saw in what was submitted. So that is helpful. I really had, I guess, a couple of comments, which is, you know, I looked over the UDC recommendations, and by and large, I thought that they were, you know, pretty on point. As best as I could tell, it appeared, you know, they offered a comment, and then I think you guys offered a response to a lot of them. And in some cases, it sort of, I was reading it, and it would suggested that you know, had yet to refine the application as a result of the feedback, or that you were planning to do so in the future. And maybe as part of the next meeting, you know, and updating maybe the materials that are online, maybe that'll become more clear what was already done, because I don't want to dwell on things that have been raised and addressed. So, because that's just time. So with all of that being said, I guess I would just, responding to the materials that we saw tonight, which again, I thought were great. I love the second story, you know, kind of, I forget what you call it, but the elevated walkway. I think it's a great way to expand the public realm in an area that, you know, we're always looking to kind of to do that. I think where I have struggled is just with, maybe it's with the renderings, is sometimes, you know, like the one we're looking at right now, it looks very horizontal and sort of blue. And then in some of the other images, it looked as though there's vertical fins and other sorts of vertical articulation that's just not quite coming across, at least in this particular rendering. So I'm wondering if, you know, so I guess my request is, you know, to you know, maybe take another shot or another look at just making sure everything's consistent so I know what we're looking at. But secondly, I guess my ultimate question is, you know, maybe could we see like what the other side of this building looks like? You know, the part that faces the thoroughfare 1, because, no, thank you. You know, my thought is it just reads a little blue and cold, and I'm picking up on what the UDC said, that they suggested, you know, a little bit more warmth of materials. And I know that you have done so in the ground floor, which I think is great. I guess, but I'm sort of responding to the upper floor, and in part because the building next to it is a little kind of gray and cool. And, you know, fundamentally, I'm thinking, you know, how does the open space read to people who are passing through it? Does it read as, you know, warm, inviting, a community, you know, or does it read as a lab office park? And that's kind of, that's where the genesis of where my question comes from. I don't have an answer, but I'm just sort of putting that invitation down as we kind of continue to review the application. My only other comment was, and I think it gets to maybe the discontinuity between materials, is on the presentation. I loved how the lobby and the winter market was porous and appeared to show flow of people and this, you know, a sense of place and community. But on the materials that are posted online, it shows kind of a wall down that with kind of double doors. And I guess I'm trying to reconcile those two things. So just sort of an invitation to look at
update.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, so I appreciate, if I may respond just very briefly, I appreciate your feedback. And I think the improvement in the building is a natural part of the design process, and that we're really looking to continue to push these ideas of place and accessibility and connection through the building. And the enhanced material, particularly through the lobby and up to the level 2 terrace, is a kind of direct result of our conversation with the Urban Design Commission. And that their comments about warmth and materiality were in particular oriented towards the development of the podium base and the kind of material that we selected for that. The curtain wall, which I neglected to mention, particularly on the south side, is developed from vertical fins and sunshades on the south. And as you move around the building, the south-facing horizontal sunshades disappear. And from the west and the east, which is more of a kind of raking light, the orientation of the facade is more vertical. And to the north, where you don't get direct light, the sunshades disappear. So that's why you're getting different readings as we move around the building. The other component of it is rendering buildings with software is a kind of complicated art. And they're the renderings that we do internally, which using our internal software, which tend to be a little bit darker and heavier. And then what you're looking at here is a professional rendering. And we're getting a more broad view of the tower with the glass, which tends to reflect more of the sky. So it tends to look more blue. As part of the process, we're developing, and part of the requirement of the Urban Design Commission and the zoning ordinance is to make a visual mock-up so that the city can look at a piece of the building in full scale as it's intended to be developed. So we'll get a chance to kind of see that. And then I think the part of it too is the facade will begin to kind of reflect the sort of movement of light and shadow on it, particularly with the development of the sunshades. And on this facade, because we're kind of pulled back, you're not seeing as much the articulation of the building that you see in some of the more close-up images that I showed in the presentation. So I hope that helps clarify it, and then we'll work to update the documents based on our current material. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Great. Okay. Thank you very, very much for the presentation. I think we were all pretty impressed. You know, I for one want a falconry class offered eventually.
I do too.
That would be cool. So, all right. If there is nothing further from the applicant or from staff, or questions or comments from the board, I would like to continue discussion on this until our meeting on October 7th, unless it needs to be continued further. So thank you very much to the applicant.
Thank you.
Motion to continue the discussion on this and of the civic space to the October 7th meeting. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Great, thank you. And for the record, that was seconded by Aaron. So thank you very much for everybody in your presentation and your hard work in getting us to very, very beautiful and well thought out designs. So
Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We appreciate your feedback and spending time with you. So thank you. Good night.
we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody would like to raise before we adjourn? Okay. As a reminder, we have a joint hearing with the Land Use Committee on Tuesday, the 28th at 6:30 to discuss a couple of map amendments and text amendments to the zoning ordinance. And our next regularly scheduled meeting is October 7th. So chair moves to adjourn, seconded by Rob. Roll call vote. The chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Rob votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Thank you all very much. I'll see you in a couple of days.
Have a great weekend.